Hi, I'm Brienne. These three pools of paint in my palette were responsible for almost every value in this painting. In my last tea to butter video, I showed you what paint consistency looks like. And today I want to show you how you can use that consistency to paint this scene. So let's get painting. First, you're going to want to make pools of paint. And I'm going to be just using Payne's Gray. For these monochromatic paintings, I like to use something that's dark and neutral, but any pigment will work. And I've got lots of water, a little bit of pigment. So we're going to start with tea. Now this first wash with just that sky is actually very, very weak tea. It's basically dirty water, okay? And so it's not even as light as my scale above. Or it's not as dark as my scale above, I should say. But it has lots of water, a little bit of pigment. Now I'm going to start adding a little more pigment, getting to basically the actual tea consistency. And for this first wash, my paint consistency is almost always tea to coffee. I don't go beyond that. As long as you keep it tea to coffee, in the tea to coffee range, then all your values are going to be light. Because remember, my first wash stage is really about tinting the light values, basically providing the colors. Now, of course, today we're not doing color. I'm just setting the value. And you'll notice I'm using the black and white version of my colored painting. And this just helps because you can see in the color version how bright and intense the colors are. And so if that's confusing or difficult for you to see the values, which it totally can be, turn your photo to black and white and just work off of that. For this exercise, you really just want to focus on getting the paint consistency right and thus the values, because this will help us for when we get to the color painting. So going all the way down, and you'll notice there's just a variation. So remember, even though it's tea to butter, it's a range. So somewhere between light tea to tea, maybe a little coffee in there. The tea to butter is just meant to help you visualize it. Now I've let that first wash dry, and I'm going to bring in the next value. So this next value is going to be coffee. So I'm bringing in more pigment, but you'll notice I'm focusing on what's happening in my palette. See how washy and they run really easily. And that's when I know that I have enough water in them, because remember, tea to coffee has a lot of water, and so it runs very easily in the palette. So focus on the consistency within the palette, and that can help a lot. All right, so now I feel like I have a nice coffee consistency. The background mountain, I feel the value is good enough that the back tree line is just slightly darker than the sky, which is what we see in the black and white photo. So now I'm going to paint these mass of trees. And remember that, trees are blob with finesse. So if you haven't seen my previous YouTube video about painting masses of trees, please check that out. But for here, I'm not having to change colors or anything like that. I just get to focus on paint consistency, which helps. I'm painting this whole shape, not painting objects, painting value shapes. This is exactly how I think when I paint. So another good reason to do these monochromatic paintings is that I'm just painting the overall value shape. So basically a shape that's the same value. All right, now I'm bringing a synthetic brush and I'm going back into basically weak tea to get a little bit of variation on that back tree line. But I want it still fairly light, and that's why I'm bringing in weak tea. But notice how my pool, I can easily change. If I need it lighter, I add more water. If I need it darker, I add more pigment. There is learning how to control your values and your paint consistency. All right, now I'm going to drop in a few more just darks while things are still really damp and wet. This is something you can do. But if you're going to drop in pigment, it's got to be more pigment, less water in your brush. Now I'm going to go into the shape of the other side of the river, and notice now I'm just slightly darker. So more pigment, getting into darker between coffee and milk for sure. But there's going to be a range, again, a variation within this one shape. Just like with the other clump of trees, I'm thinking of blobs with finesse. So using my Chinese calligraphy brush here, which I love, I got from asianbrushpainters.com. They are so great for painting tree masses because they make just various funky shapes. All right, well, I just wanted you to notice how I'm letting the pigment run within the mask because everything's, wet. I'm varying how much the pigment ratio, basically, even as I paint in one big shape. Now I'm going to keep painting that big, massive shape of trees, right? And just finishing a few sky holes. But notice how it's all basically one value, one paint consistency with subtle variation. But then I'm going to go ahead and drop in more pigment, take a synthetic brush, finesse the edges even more with a few branches and trunks and maybe indication of some leaves. And again, I do want to say that if you're going to drop pigment into damp areas, you do want more pigment in your brush, less water in your brush than is on the paper. Here, I'm definitely using cream to milk, right? So these are the darker areas, but I'm doing it while it's still damp. And this is where practicing the damp, dry, and wet paper with the different paint consistencies helps. This is how I use it in a painting, right? So I've just got pools of paint and varying the pigment ratio. This is how I get the value variation. And if you do it while it's damp, you get wonderful soft edges. Okay, I'm going to wet the area slightly of the water area so I can bring in the reflections. I like to pre-wet, not the whole thing. Notice how I'm doing just different areas basically, so there's soft kind of movement of the water. Now with your reflections, a lot of times I notice beginning artists don't do the reflections strong enough. This is where turning the reference photo to black and white can really help you see the value. So this value is probably something in the milk to coffee range. Don't necessarily want it too dark. And I'm making horizontal strokes and vertical strokes, but kind of a combination of both to get that feeling of ripples in the water. And I pre-wet some of the areas, but not all of it, because I like to have hard and soft edges. So you decide whether you want hard or soft edges, and that determines whether you want to pre-wet the paper or not. Now I'm going to add some value into the trees on the right. Now they're dry, so I'm coming in with a paint consistency of milk to coffee, right? And softening some edges. So putting a shape down, soften some edges. Going to add a few more details here. And this is where the details happen. Little bits of branches or darker areas and softening some areas. That's how I end up finishing the painting. But I have my big value shapes in with the help of paint consistency. So the key takeaway is that between using tea to butter and everything in between, remember it's a range, I get the different values. So my light areas are tea to coffee, my middle values are coffee to milk, and my darks are milk to cream. And this will be the same even when I go to do the color version of this painting. But focusing on paint consistency helps us to get the right values. This is the finished painting. Let's just look at it with the tape off. Notice how even with this monochromatic painting, we get the feeling of light and distance and form with value changes. Tea to butter and paint consistency isn't something that's separate from painting. It is painting. Once you become more comfortable and understand paint consistency, controlling your values becomes so much easier. Today, I wanted to remove color from the equation so that we could focus on value and paint consistency. Next week, I will do this same scene, but in full color, so you can see how paint consistency translates to a full watercolor. The color changes, the paint consistency does not. I challenge you to try this and paint a monochromatic painting, focusing on the paint consistency. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching. And please like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you would like to learn more from me online, please visit my website at travelingcolorstudio.com. I would like to see you there. Thanks and happy painting.